Hi, listeners. This is Vivian. I wanted to preface this episode by saying this is the first episode we are doing discussing adverse childhood experiences, also referred to as ACEs. The one we are discussing today is particularly heavy, and that is the death of a parent. This episode contains potentially upsetting content. If you or a loved one have experienced the loss of a parent, or if you are parenting children through the loss of a parent, I hope this episode will offer you a small amount of support. If this trauma is not something someone close to you has experienced, I would still encourage you to listen, as we live in a world where we could all use more kindness, and understanding the paths that others are walking can only help us to develop more empathy. This will be a two-part series, so I'd encourage you to join us for both parts. With that being said, I'm going to start the show.
Welcome back to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back.
Today, we are very excited because it is our very first episode where we have a special guest, and I would like her to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cathy Parrish. I have been practicing pediatrics for almost 40 years, and I am currently retired. I am also the mom of 4 kids.
So today we are actually 14 kids, 3 docs.
So today, our episode today is going to be dealing with the topic of parental loss. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
In recent years, many of us, I think many parents too, have heard the term adverse childhood events, ACEs. And we've been studying these more and more and how they affect kids who've been exposed to trauma, how they can affect their behavior, how they can affect their levels of anxiety. Just there's a lot of contexts in which this term comes up, these ACEs. And we know that one of the most prominent ones is death or loss of a parent. And when I look at the literature that the American Academy of Pediatrics has about this, they quote that in the US, 1 in 20 children will lose a parent by age 16.
Yeah, so I'm going to start very briefly in that I am one of those 1 in 20 children who lost a parent themselves. When I was 15, my father suddenly died from a cardiac event, going from well one day and the next day he was gone. And it is something that has shaped me and my memories and who I am today. Why don't you share your story, Cathy?
So my children also have experienced parental loss. One morning when my twins were 6, my middle child was 8, and my oldest was 12. Their dad went to work. He was totally healthy, 45 years old, and had a bleed in his head sitting at his desk at work and died shortly afterward in the NCCU at Hopkins. And so that absolutely shaped their lives and mine from that moment forward. That was 25 years ago.
I remember that. Actually, I remember that very vividly. Cathy, Dr. Parrish, and I worked together when I was a resident at Hopkins, and I had met her and her husband, Bruce, when I entered the residency program at Hopkins because they were welcoming the new interns to Hopkins. And it was shortly thereafter, right?
Yes, that was in June, and Bruce died in October. And so people enter your lives at different times when they're supposed to. That's how I've always thought about it. Mm-hmm. And Sylvia entered my life at exactly the right time.
Yeah, this was
Dr. Bank, because I needed someone who understood what the children and I were going through. And Sylvia had lived this already.
Dr. Parrish led the clinic where I worked at every Tuesday throughout my entire residency. And I vividly remember when we were working together just a few short months when Bruce died. And I remember going to the NCCU to visit you there,
yes,
right?
Correct.
We had moments in continuity clinic where we would look at we would cry,
Oh gosh.
we would hug,
Yeah.
we would have like a moment,
Yes, absolutely.
and then we would move on, and then we would be like, next patient, right? Like,
Next patient, because that's life, right?
yes.
That's what you have to do. You have to move forward. But as the parent of the 4 children that experienced this, it changed them and me forever. And also the way I took care of families who lost parents.
Yeah.
So my oldest was 12 at the time, and she developed significant anxiety. And I think more significant than I realized at the time.
Really?
I was completely overwhelmed in trying to run a house with 4 children and work full time. I had envisioned doing this with a life partner, and that wasn't happening anymore. Think about making 2 volcanoes for 3rd grade instead of 1. I had twins by yourself while cooking dinner. Single parenting by force. So that's what life was like. And each of my children has verbalized that they're worried about becoming a parent, because what if they die and then they're not there for their kids? So that probably tells you how difficult this was for them and what a big loss it really was. My middle child is an artist. She also developed anxiety, but is probably the most self-aware of my 4 children. And perhaps that is because she's an artist. She sees the world differently. And she put herself in therapy at the age of 17 and is still seeing the same therapist at the age of 32. This person is a saint.
Oh, that's wonderful.
This therapist met her for coffee in the evenings while she was in college to do therapy, and does Zoom therapy now that that's a thing with her still, and has kind of been her link to mental health success, I would say. She is a mom. She has a 7-month-old, and she is a terrific mom, and probably of the 4 children, the rock of my family.
Really?
Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
absolutely had anxiety and needed help with that. And even had a little brief bout of anorexia. My boys are twins. They both have attention deficit disorder and anxiety. I think it's harder for boys to take themselves to mental health services. And they were only 6 when they lost their dad. They don't remember him.
Really?
And that absence of a male role model has been really difficult for them. Not that they didn't have uncles that cared, that stepped up, friends that cared, that stepped up, neighbors' dads that cared and stepped up.
And your dad?
And my dad, their granddad, who passed away when they were 18, when they were going to college. So they had male role models around often, but absolutely they would both tell you it's not the same as having a dad. And it's a reminder that comes up so often in school.
Yes.
You know, there's the father-son this and the father-son that, and there was never the father to go to any of that. They were in 1st grade when he died. So they would take Uncle Alan or Grandpa or Pop, or, you know, some other kid's dad would take them with his kid, but it was never the same. So I would say the loss was even bigger for the 2 of them.
Can you give some examples of, from your memory, situations where you knew that whatever was happening with your kid, that was like as a result of the loss? Like a behavioral thing or an incident, like descriptive as to what that looked like in your household.
So kids who've lost a parent, their hippocampus just fires nonstop. And the reason they develop anxiety is the regulation of the hippocampus and the ability of it to calm you down is gone. It gets stressed to the max and just fires
All the time.
all the time. And so these kids don't have any way to put normal losses and normal stresses in perspective. I remember a time when my daughter was 13, just a year after her dad passed away. She was outside and someone said that they had been exposed to poison ivy. And she came in the house and was frantic, lying on the floor, scratching herself all over, sure she had poison ivy. Of course, medically, I can tell you that's not even how that works. It would show up 5 days later.
Right.
But she was so anxious, we couldn't calm her down. And finally, after 20 minutes, she started bawling, saying, "Where is Dad?" And she said, "What if I die like Dad?" And there it was. There it was. I need Dad. I wish he was here. So that, that's kind of how this manifested from time to time. There would be times where anytime there was a father-daughter or a father-son event, it was a very traumatic thing. The high school my girls went to, both of them, went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and neither one went to the father-daughter dance once in 4 years. It's a huge event at the school. Their uncles offered to go. It was really hurtful for them. They couldn't envision going with anybody but their dad, and he wasn't there.
Yeah.
For my boys, my son just bought a house. He's 31 years old. And I've been there pretty much every step of the way, giving him what advice I could about homeowners insurance, for instance.
Right.
And he has said probably a dozen times in the months leading up to closing, "I wish Dad was here to look at the furnace. I wish Dad was here to look at the electric. I don't know if I'm making a good purchase. I know you said it's okay, Mom, but I wish Dad was here." So that loss doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It's not a void someone else can fill. And even when you're a super mom and you stood on your head for the last 25 years to be there for everything.
Which you are. Let the listeners know.
Thank you. But, but I'm not Dad. I can't give my boys advice about what it feels like to date as a man. For instance, I can tell you a funny story too. I came home and we had one home computer, an old Dell that was very clunky. And I walked in the office where it was, assuming my one son was doing his homework. And there were pictures of breasts on the screen. And I was like, "What is this?" It was a site called Boobs, Boobs, Boobs in America. That's a whole other episode on this show about hormones and teenagers. But suffice it to say, when he turned the computer off, and I told him how would you feel if this was your sister on the screen? Or, and tried to impress upon him what this was like for women, and this was not a good thing. I realized I was not the right person to talk to. And so I called his uncles, who promptly said things like, "This was the kind of thing boys do and are curious about, and to take a deep breath, he's not going to be a sexual predator." So, it's not all traumatic moments. Some of it's just stuff you don't know how to handle.
Yeah.
And I would imagine if you're left as a single dad, there are a lot of these moments if you have daughters. I would think that's equally difficult.
Right. Absolutely.
In the second half, we're going to dive a little deeper as to what behaviors can look like in a child who's experienced trauma, as well as some of the highs and lows and unexpected course of the grieving process. I loved the story of your 13-year-old and the poison ivy, because I think parents that are parenting children that have experienced trauma, often their behavior is because of the grief. Although to the outsider, the behavior doesn't match the grief. You don't see immediately why the poison ivy has anything to do with the loss of the father. But your daughter got to the point of expressing that to you verbally. And I think there's a lot of times in trauma where kids act out or tantrum if they're younger, where whatever it was that incited that behavior has nothing to do with them. It's really the grieving. And that can look different at different ages and continue on for years and then come at very unexpected times.
Oh,
right?
Yes, I mean, so difficult for any of my children to go to any funeral.
Oh,
Still,
yeah.
even when it's a 90-year-old grandparent.
Yeah.
Someone who had been suffering and it was just their time. And it was really a blessing that they passed away.
No, I find it ironic because at my own father's funeral, I don't really feel like I had a lot of emotion. I mean, it's so shocking and sudden.
Right.
And then there's the families around. There's a lot of expectation of what you're supposed to be and do.
Oh, yeah.
Especially as a teenager when you're trying to be someone or figuring yourself out. But I think I cried at Bruce's funeral like it was my dad's funeral, right? Like I remember I remember getting off of work. They let me out of residency to come to Bruce's funeral. And I was a complete mess at Bruce's. I met this man once.
Yes.
I had known you for a couple of months. And I was crying at that funeral like it was my own father's funeral.
Because you knew this was a loss you knew, right? So one of the nurses in my practice at the time also came, and it was someone who had been triaging from me, who I knew, but not who I knew outside of the practice.
Yeah.
And she came to the wake and was beside herself, only for me to find out that her dad died when she was 10. So it is a loss that stays with you for a very long time, and it comes back.
At unexpected times.
At unexpected times. Yes, that's the worst. And as you know, in pediatrics, we take care of children and parents, really, right? We take care of families. It comes back at unexpected times for me too. 25 years later, I'll be reading a book or watching a movie. Mary Poppins Returns was a great movie, right? You can tell I'm a pediatrician. And it centers around Jane and Michael as grown-ups. And Michael, at the beginning of the movie, if you don't remember, has lost his wife and is left to raise the children. And he is up in the attic rummaging around for something and talking to her, even though she's not there. I could not get through that scene in the movie theater. I was bawling.
Really?
And that was 20 years later because I understand that.
Yeah.
I still occasionally talk to Bruce. I look at the ceiling and say, and?
Right.
What am I supposed to do now? So it's a loss that affects your whole family for a very long time. The best thing I ever read about grief, ironically, is in a novel called Dear Edward by Anne Napolitano. And Edward is somebody who is on a plane ride with his family. And long story short, the plane crashes and he's the only survivor. And he loses his brother and parents. And towards the end of the book, there's a lot in the middle there. He's talking to his therapist at a Starbucks 6 years later when he's doing a lot better. And he asks the therapist, when do you ever get over this? And the therapist looks at him and says, a loss like this is in your skin. It's part of you. You don't ever get over it. You learn to live with it. And that would be, I would say, the big lesson about gigantic loss or trauma. You learn to live with it more than you, quote unquote, get over it. And so your kids learn to live with it too.
Yeah. Like for me, my brother obviously suffered parental loss as well. He was a little bit older. But one way that it really manifested for him was dreaming. He would often wake up in the middle of the night, and it's not like a nightmare, but like that vivid interaction that you have with the parent that you lost, that you can't be with anymore, would drive him into almost a frenzied grief in the middle of the night, where it was like he was right there. And then you wake up and then the loss is so acute that he would call me crying.
Yeah.
Just that was how it manifested with my brother.
If there is a plus side to losing a parent, my children are bonded at the hip. They're very close to each other. They are there for each other.
Yeah.
For anything and everything. We are a tight family, and more so because of this loss, I'm certain.
Yeah.
So listeners, I'm going to end the first half of this interview with Dr. Parrish. I think some important takeaways from this episode are that processing trauma and the grieving process in children can look very different and vary over time. No one's course in grieving is the same, and certainly no child's course in grieving is the same. We do know there is a correlation with anxiety and ADHD and exposure to previous traumas. So we want to be on the lookout for those and supporting our children through those. We also know that trauma absolutely affects behavior, and that children who've experienced any type of trauma can have moments of crying or seemingly overreacting, such as Dr. Parrish described with her daughter in the poison ivy, or acting out or tantruming. And that can often show up seemingly randomly at unexpected times, but still actually be a response to past trauma or grieving. I love her description at the close of this episode where she talks about how bonded together her and her children are. And I think that is to her credit for shepherding her children in a loving and consistent way while they walked through this together. Please join us next time as we dive deeper into discussing practical ways parents can help their children process grief, as well as support medical providers can offer. I'm going to jump back into this interview to close out this episode.
I wanted to take a moment to thank you for coming on our show, and your storytelling and your honesty. It means a lot to us that you believe in our show and are willing to, really help try to reach people here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Cathy Parrish.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.